Rain poured down on the quiet streets of Maple Creek. Jack, a veteran, and his German Shepherd Rex slowed their truck when the headlights caught a fragile figure. Inside a broken phone booth stood a little girl, trembling, leaning on a single crutch. In her small hand, she held something no child should carry in the storm, an X-ray film. Her tears blurred the glass, and in that instant, Jack knew this was not just a lost child. This was the beginning of a truth darker than the night. Before we step into this story of courage and compassion, tell me, where are you watching from? Comment below, and remember to subscribe so you never miss the stories of silent heroes still among us. Wishing you a day filled with hope and kindness. The rain had been falling for hours, a relentless curtain of water that turned the small town of Maple Creek into a ghostly landscape of flickering streetlights and empty roads. It was close to midnight when Jack steered his old pickup truck through the downpour, the windshield wipers beating back the storm in tired rhythm. Sitting alert in the passenger seat was Rex, his 5-year-old German Shepherd, sable black and tan with a powerful build and intelligent amber eyes that missed nothing. Jack, a veteran long accustomed to silence and shadows, had taken to driving these late-night routes with Rex by his side, the kind of routine that gave him purpose when the world had grown too quiet. But that night, Maple Creek carried a weight that felt different, as if the storm itself was holding back a secret. The truck's headlights cut across a stretch of broken asphalt, and in that sudden beam, Jack caught sight of a figure near the edge of the road. He slowed, squinting through the sheets of rain, his hand instinctively tightening on the wheel, while Rex let out a low growl, the sound that always meant something wasn't right. Just beyond the streaks of water stood a child, far too small to be out in weather like this, trembling beneath the weak glow of a crooked street lamp. She was pressed close to a battered phone booth, its glass cracked and clouded with rain, her small body leaning on a single crutch that seemed far too heavy for her size. Jack pulled over, engine rumbling low, his heart clenching at the sight of her fragile silhouette. As he stepped out into the storm, Rex bounded ahead, careful yet protective, tail stiff, ears pricked forward. Jack called softly, his voice carrying over the rain, "Hey kiddo, are you all right?" The girl turned, and the sight struck him like a blow. She couldn't have been more than 5. Her blonde hair was plastered to her pale face, strands sticking to tear-streaked cheeks. Where one of her legs should have been, there was instead a metal prosthetic glinting harshly every time lightning ripped across the sky. She leaned heavily on her crutch, the other arm clutching something against her chest with desperate force. Jack moved closer, raising his hand so he wouldn't scare her, while Rex circled gently, offering his presence as a shield. In that trembling grasp was an X-ray film, its edges bent and damp, but still visible through the storm. She held it as though it were the only thing tethering her to the world, her knuckles white against the plastic. Jack's brows knit in confusion. What kind of child would cling to a medical film in the middle of a storm? The girl's lips trembled, words stifled by both fear and the cold. Jack crouched low, lowering himself so his eyes were level with hers. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe. What's your name?" But before she could answer, the sound of tires sloshing against wet pavement made them all turn. A patrol car rolled slowly past, its red and blue lights faint under the sheets of rain. 2 officers inside glanced briefly at the scene. One of them, a young patrolman with cropped blonde hair, shook his head and muttered something Jack couldn't hear. The older officer beside him, weary eyes hidden beneath the brim of his cap, gave a dismissive wave through the glass. The car did not stop, only slowed before moving on, leaving Jack standing in the downpour with the girl and Rex. The message was clear. To them, this was nothing more than a lost child on a stormy night. Jack's jaw tightened, his gut burning with frustration, but he forced himself back to the girl, knowing this wasn't the kind of pain you could turn away from. The girl began to sob, her voice breaking free of the rain. She lifted the X-ray film higher with shaking hands, pressing it toward him. Through the blur of water and lightning, Jack saw it, an image of fractured ribs, the kind of break that came not from accident but from violence. He swallowed hard, his soldier's instincts recognizing the truth of injuries that told stories words often couldn't. Her breath hitched as she choked out, "It's my mom. He hurt her so bad." Her words were raw, slicing into the night with the weight of something no child should ever have to carry. Jack steadied her by the shoulders, his eyes locked on hers. "Who hurt her?" he asked quietly, though a part of him already feared the answer. The girl sniffled, tears mingling with raindrops, and whispered with a trembling conviction, "My dad. He doesn't just hurt her. He hurts other women too. They're locked up. Mommy's still there. Please, you have to believe me." Her small chest heaved with every word, the storm around them powerless compared to the storm in her heart. Jack felt Rex press against his leg, the shepherd's ears flat, body tense, as if he too understood the gravity of the confession. For a long moment, the rain filled the silence between them, drumming against the pavement, soaking Jack's jacket, dripping off Rex's coat. Jack's thoughts raced. This wasn't a simple case of neglect or a runaway child. This was bigger, darker, the kind of truth that small towns buried because they were too afraid to face it. His hand hovered near the radio on his belt, but he hesitated. The dismissive glance of the officers lingered in his mind. Could he even trust the system here? He looked back at the child, at the way she clutched that X-ray like her life depended on it. And perhaps, in a way, it did. Jack nodded once, slow but steady, his voice low enough for only her and Rex to hear. "You did the right thing bringing this. You're safe with me now. What's your name?" She wiped her wet cheeks with the back of her hand and whispered, "Emily." The name landed heavy in the storm. Jack repeated it gently, as though promising to remember. "Emily, you're not alone anymore." He stood, lifting his coat, to shield her as best he could from the downpour, guiding her toward the truck. Rex trotted at her side, brushing against her leg like a silent guardian, amber eyes never straying from her trembling form. As they reached the truck, Jack glanced back at the empty road. The patrol car's taillights long vanished into the storm. He knew in that moment that the little girl had given him more than just a plea. She had handed him the beginning of a fight he hadn't expected. Emily climbed into the passenger seat with Jack's help, still gripping the X-ray as though it might vanish if she let go. Rex settled at her feet, his breath steady, his presence grounding the fragile hope inside the cab. Jack climbed behind the wheel, his jaw set, his mind already racing ahead. Outside, thunder cracked over Maple Creek, the storm stretching endlessly into the night. Inside the truck, however, a fragile alliance had been born. A broken child, a loyal dog, and a man who had once sworn to protect those who could not protect themselves. Jack glanced at Emily, her wide eyes filled with both terror and the smallest spark of hope, then at Rex, whose steady gaze met his like a vow. He tightened his grip on the wheel. Whatever darkness lay ahead, it had just become his fight. The storm showed no sign of relenting when Jack guided the old pickup off the narrow main road and toward the outskirts of Maple Creek. The beams of the headlights stretched weakly through the sheets of rain, cutting a path toward a lonely cabin he had bought years earlier for the sake of quiet. By the time he parked beneath the shelter of pine trees, the world was drenched and silent, but for the hammering of rain on the roof. Emily sat curled in the passenger seat, still clutching the X-ray, her small body trembling as though every sound outside might break her. Rex had not left her side, the shepherd pressed close against her leg, his steady breathing keeping her anchored. Jack took one long look at the child, then opened the door and carried her gently into the safety of the cabin. Inside, the cabin was simple. Aged wooden beams, shelves lined with tools, a stone fireplace cold and unused for weeks. Jack set Emily in a worn armchair near the hearth, then crouched to light the fire. Sparks caught against dry kindling, and soon the crackle of flames spread warmth through the room. Emily's cheeks glowed faintly in the flicker, though her wide eyes remained shadowed by fear. Rex lay down beside her, his sable coat glistening with rain, tail sweeping the floor slowly as he pressed closer, his amber eyes never leaving her face. Jack draped a wool blanket around her shoulders and handed her a mug of warm water, speaking in the calm, measured tone he once used for frightened soldiers. "You're safe here. No one can hurt you tonight." Emily sniffled, clinging to the blanket with her good hand, her prosthetic leg resting stiffly against the chair. For a moment she seemed too overwhelmed to speak, but then her voice came small and broken. "My daddy's name is Victor. He He hurts people, not just Mommy. He makes them do things, bad things, and if they don't listen, he locks them up or makes them disappear. Her eyes shimmered as she lifted the X-ray again. Mommy said this was proof. She told me to run with it if something ever happened. She said someone good would understand. Her words shook, as if she could barely hold them together, but there was determination buried in her trembling that no storm could wash away. Jack listened without interrupting, the firelight deepening the lines across his weathered face. He had seen broken children before, faces hollowed by fear in villages torn apart by war, small hands that clung to strangers when everything familiar had been destroyed. In Emily's eyes he saw the same haunting shadow. He remembered nights when the screams of the innocent echoed louder than gunfire, and the helplessness that came with realizing he could not save them all. Now, here in this cabin, one child had come into his path, carrying proof of horrors inflicted in his own town. Jack clenched his jaw, forcing back the memories, and placed a steady hand on the armrest near hers. "You were brave to bring this," he said, voice low but resolute. "Your mother trusted you, and you did the right thing." Rex stirred, nose twitching as he shifted closer. The dog's head brushed against Emily's hand, and she stroked his fur absent-mindedly, though her eyes never left Jack's. Then Rex's body stiffened, ears pointing forward, nostrils flaring as he leaned toward Emily's damp clothes. He sniffed once, twice, then let out a sharp whine, circling her slowly. Jack watched carefully, understanding Rex's signals as well as his own heartbeat. The shepherd pressed his nose against the sleeve of Emily's coat, then stepped back with a low growl. Jack leaned forward, inspecting the fabric, and his stomach tightened. There was the faint metallic scent of dried blood, and beneath it the acrid tang of gasoline. These were not smells a child should carry. These were the marks of violence and captivity. Rex growled again, his gaze fixed as if declaring the truth of her story beyond doubt. Emily flinched at the sound, clutching the blanket tighter, but Jack raised a calming hand. "Easy, Rex," he murmured, then looked back to the girl. "He's not angry at you, Emily. He just knows what you've been through. He can smell the truth." For the first time that night, Emily's lips curved faintly, uncertainly, into something close to trust. She leaned against Rex, whispering, "Thank you, boy." The shepherd lowered his head onto her lap, his weight reassuring, amber eyes softening. It was as if, in his own quiet way, he had accepted the role of her protector. Jack rose, pacing once across the cabin, mind racing with the burden now laid in his hands. He could not simply hand this case to the same officers who had already dismissed the child on the roadside. He needed someone who could be trusted, someone not under the thumb of Victor's influence. His thoughts settled on Martha Jennings. She was in her late 40s, a woman with auburn hair streaked by silver, stern eyes that missed little, and a reputation for being both incorruptible and stubborn to the point of defiance. Martha had spent 2 decades as a sheriff's deputy before being sidelined to administrative work after clashing with the wrong political figures. Yet Jack had always known her as one of the few in Maple Creek's law enforcement who still believed in justice. He crossed the room to the old rotary phone sitting on a side table. The line crackled faintly as he dialed Martha's number from memory. On the third ring, a tired but firm voice answered, "Jennings?" Jack lowered his tone, careful but urgent. "Martha, it's Jack. I need you to listen, and I need you to keep this quiet. I've got a little girl here. Her name's Emily. She has proof, X-rays, injuries, testimony. She says her father's behind it, and from the look in her eyes, I believe her." Silence stretched across the line, broken only by the fire's crackle and the rain outside. Then Martha spoke, steel beneath her words. "If you say it's real, Jack, then I'm with you. Keep her safe. I'll come at first light." Jack hung up, a weight easing slightly from his shoulders, though the road ahead was still steep. He turned back to Emily, who had been watching him with wide, uncertain eyes. She swallowed, then asked softly, "Did you call someone good?" Jack crouched again, resting a hand near hers. "Yes, someone I trust. She'll help us." Emily studied him for a moment, then nodded, the tension in her small shoulders easing just enough for her to whisper, "Okay, Uncle Jack." The title slipped from her lips with both hesitation and hope, as if testing whether it would hold. Jack froze, the words striking deeper than he expected. He had lived years without family, years defined by ghosts and silence. Yet here was a child, broken and bruised, offering him a place in her fragile world. His chest tightened, but he allowed the smallest nod, a silent acceptance of the trust she had given. Emily leaned back at last, eyelids heavy, Rex's warmth lulling her toward rest. Jack remained crouched by the fire, gaze locked on the X-ray lying across the table, its ghostly image of broken ribs glowing faint in the flickering light. Outside, the storm roared on, but inside the cabin, a fragile alliance had taken root. An old soldier, a loyal dog, and a child who had chosen to believe in him. The night had grown heavier, the storm settling into a misty drizzle, as Jack guided the old truck down the unpaved back roads that twisted toward Black Hollow. Emily sat pressed between him and Rex, her small body tense, her eyes wide and unblinking, as though she was guiding them not with sight but with memory. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper, yet each word carried weight. He takes them there, in the woods. A cabin with chains on the doors, Mommy's inside. Jack gripped the wheel harder, the forest looming ahead like a dark wall, the headlights cutting shallow lines through the mist. Black Hollow was notorious even among the locals, a stretch of woodland dense with gnarled trees and fog that lingered even on summer days. Tonight, it was a shadowed labyrinth, the ground soaked with rain, branches creaking like voices in the wind. Jack parked at the edge of the tree line, silencing the engine. He glanced at Emily, who clutched the hem of his jacket with her good hand. "Stay close, Emily. No matter what you hear, don't let go." She nodded, biting her lip, her crutch sinking slightly into the mud as she leaned against him. Rex leapt out first, muscles taut, nose to the ground, his coat bristling as if the very air warned him of danger. They moved deeper into the forest, the path narrowing until the moonlight was almost swallowed. Jack's boots sank into wet earth while Emily's uneven steps echoed faintly. Yet she pressed forward, guided by a courage too large for her small frame. Rex suddenly froze, ears sharp, a low growl rippling through his chest. Jack crouched, signaling silence. From the stillness came a faint sound, weak, muffled, like a whimper carried on the breeze. Jack's heart tightened. Rex surged ahead, nose tracing the scent of blood mixed with rust and damp wood. Emily stumbled, pointing through the trees. "There, that's where he keeps them." At the clearing's edge stood a derelict building of rotting planks and warped tin, half swallowed by vines. Its windows were boarded, its door reinforced with heavy chains, the smell of decay seeping from within. Jack approached carefully, his flashlight beam skimming across dark stains on the wood. Blood, faint but undeniable. Rex pawed at the ground near the door, teeth bared, growl deepening. Jack pressed Emily gently against the cover of a tree. "Stay behind me." She clutched her crutch and nodded, tears slipping down her face even before the door gave way beneath Jack's force. The chains rattled, snapping against the frame as the cabin opened into suffocating darkness. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and old smoke. Jack swept the flashlight across rusted bed frames, filthy blankets, and shackles bolted to walls. The beam froze on 3 figures huddled against the far corner. They were women, gaunt and bruised, their faces pale, eyes wide with both terror and disbelief at the sudden intrusion. One of them tried to rise but fell back, her wrists bound in iron cuffs, and then Jack's breath caught. Among them was a woman in her 30s, blonde hair matted, her face swollen with bruises yet unmistakably familiar. Emily gasped, dropping her crutch with a clatter. "Mommy!" Laura Carter lifted her head slowly, her expression breaking into both relief and anguish at the sight of her daughter. She looked older than her years, her skin marred by cruelty, but her eyes, though dimmed, still softened at Emily's cry. "Emily!" Her voice cracked, hoarse from exhaustion. She reached out as far as the chains allowed. Emily stumbled forward, falling into Jack's arms before he steadied her. Together they approached the bed. Emily grasped her mother's hand through the iron, sobbing into her bruised skin. "I found help, Mommy. I brought Uncle Jack. And Rex. You're safe now." Laura's tears slipped silently, her body trembling with the weight of a hope she had nearly lost. Jack worked quickly, pulling tools from his belt to pry the cuffs open. The other two women watched with hollow eyes, their bodies frail, one with a broken arm poorly bound, the other clutching her ribs. Their stories spilled out in fractured sentences. Victor was not just an abusive husband. He was a trafficker, running women through hidden routes across counties, using fear and violence to silence them. They had been taken under promises of work or shelter, then trapped, their lives reduced to chains. Jack felt rage swell inside him, memories of fellow soldiers lost in foreign villages returning with clarity. Their deaths not in vain, but as testament to what it meant to shield the innocent. He swore under his breath that he would not fail these women. Rex stayed alert, circling the room, nose pressed to corners where the smell of blood lingered. He growled low at the chains, as though recognizing the suffering embedded in their cold iron. Emily leaned against her mother, tears dampening Laura's torn blouse. Yet Laura's strength had long been drained. She stroked Emily's hair weakly, her voice almost gone. "I knew. You'd run. I prayed someone would find you, but I can't. I can't keep you safe anymore." Emily shook her head fiercely, gripping her tighter. "You don't have to. Uncle Jack will. And Rex." Her childlike certainty pierced the heaviness of the room, her faith giving voice to what Laura could not believe for herself. Jack freed Laura from the bed, then the other women, helping each of them to their feet. He steadied their trembling forms, guiding them carefully toward the doorway. The night air rushed in, cool and damp, washing over their bruised skin like a fragile mercy. Emily refused to let go of her mother's hand, even as Laura staggered, every step an act of will. Jack supported her other side, his jaw set, eyes burning with resolve. He had seen too much death, too much betrayal, but here was a fight he could choose, to stand between evil and the broken. He would not turn away. The forest around Black Hollow seemed to listen as the small group stepped out of the prison. The rain had stopped, leaving only the whisper of dripping leaves and the crunch of mud beneath their feet. Jack looked back at the cabin, its door swaying open, chains dangling like the husks of something monstrous. He knew this was only the beginning. Victor's reach was long, and the shack was just one piece of an empire built on cruelty. But in this moment, under the weight of the trees and the trembling hands of those he had freed, Jack understood the choice was already made. He would fight for them, for Emily, for every soul trapped in Victor's shadow. The rain had slowed to a fine drizzle when Jack led the women out of the clearing, Emily gripping her mother's weakened hand, Rex pacing protectively at their side. The air smelled of wet pine and smoke, but beneath it lingered a tension, the kind Jack had learned to trust during years in combat. He paused at the tree line, scanning the shadows with wary eyes. Every instinct told him danger was near, waiting for the moment when hope dared to surface. His grip tightened on the rifle slung across his shoulder. They had barely begun the descent toward the river when the sound of snapping branches echoed across the hollow. Flashlights cut through the mist, harsh beams sweeping across the undergrowth. Figures emerged, rough men with hardened faces, their boots sinking deep into the mud as they closed in like wolves. At the center of their line strode Victor Carter, tall and broad-shouldered, his slicked-back hair dripping with rain, his dark coat flaring as he moved. His mouth twisted into a cold grin as his gaze fell on Jack, Emily, and Laura. "You thought you could steal from me," he spat, voice booming, "but you can't take what's mine." Jack pushed Emily behind him, his body forming a shield, while Rex stepped forward, ears flat, teeth bared. The shepherd's growl rolled like thunder, his muscles coiled for the strike. The men spread out, their weapons crude but deadly, chains, knives, and one holding a shotgun slung across his chest. Jack leveled his rifle, eyes fixed on Victor, his voice calm but edged with steel. "They're not yours, not anymore." Victor's grin faltered, replaced by fury. He barked an order and the men surged forward, the night erupting into chaos. Rex launched first, a streak of muscle and fur. He slammed into one of the attackers, jaws snapping down on the man's forearm. The scream split the air as the weapon clattered into the mud. Jack fired a warning shot, forcing two others to drop back, then swung his rifle like a club to knock another to the ground. The clearing filled with shouts, rain, and the snarls of a shepherd who refused to yield. Emily clung to her crutch, frozen in fear, yet unwilling to turn away, her wide eyes fixed on the figure of Victor as he stalked closer through the chaos. Victor's eyes glowed with something darker than rage, something colder than hatred. He pointed at Emily, his voice cutting through the storm like a blade. You ruined everything. Your mother was weak, and you're worse. You're not my blood, never were. You're nothing but a burden I should have cast aside long ago. The words slammed into the clearing like a curse. Emily's sobs tore free, her small shoulders shaking, her face contorted in anguish. She buried her face into her mother's torn dress for a heartbeat, then lifted her head, eyes blazing with a strength far beyond her years. "You're not my father," she cried, her voice piercing through the storm, fierce and raw. "You're a monster! You killed my mom, you hurt everyone, and I'm not afraid of you anymore." The declaration echoed, silencing even the men around Victor for a moment. Jack's chest tightened as he looked at her, seeing not just a child, but the spark of resilience he had once fought to protect on foreign soil. Victor's face twisted in rage, veins bulging at his temple as he lunged toward her. Jack moved instantly, intercepting him with the full weight of his body. The two men crashed into the mud, fists flying, Victor's brute strength clashing against Jack's hardened skill. Years of combat steadied Jack's movements, each strike precise, controlled, yet fueled by a fury that burned deeper than memory. Victor snarled, clawing for Jack's throat, but Rex barreled into him, tearing fabric and forcing him back. Laura cried out, stumbling as she tried to shield Emily, but the effort was too much for her battered body. In the confusion, Victor lashed out, knocking her to the ground. Her cry of pain rang sharp, her frail body collapsing. Emily screamed for her mother, clutching her hand as Jack pulled Victor back into the fray. "Stay with me, Laura," Jack urged, even as he swung his rifle stock across another attacker's jaw. Blood mixed with rain, the forest floor turning into a battlefield. Emily pressed herself against Laura's side, her tears streaking down her cheeks, her small hand gripping desperately. Rex stood over them, his body forming a living wall, growling at any who dared step closer. His teeth glistened in the dim light, his bark reverberating like a shield between the child and her tormentor. Just as Victor raised his voice to order another strike, sirens cut through the forest, their wails shattering the night. Red and blue lights flickered between the trees, beams of headlights sweeping across the clearing. Out from the chaos came Sheriff's Deputy Martha Jennings, her auburn hair plastered to her face by the rain, her revolver steady in her hands. Behind her, a squad of officers moved in formation, shouting commands, rifles raised. "Drop your weapons! On the ground now!" she barked, her voice ringing with authority that demanded obedience. The fight drained instantly from Victor's men as the line of officers closed in. Those still standing dropped their weapons, hands raised. Rex released his grip on the man he'd pinned, stepping back but staying ready, eyes burning. Victor, however, refused to yield. He stood, chest heaving, mud streaking his coat, glaring with venom at Jack, then at Emily. "This isn't over," he spat, his words dripping with promise. Martha didn't flinch. She leveled her revolver at him. "It is now." The cuffs snapped cold around his wrists as two deputies forced him to his knees. Jack hurried to Laura's side, lifting her carefully. Blood seeped from a wound along her ribs, her face pale as she whispered weakly, "Take care of Emily." Jack's voice was firm, steady, though his heart twisted. "You'll tell her yourself, Laura. Stay awake." He motioned for the paramedics, who rushed forward with a stretcher. Emily clung to her mother's hand until the last possible moment, her sobs muffled against Jack's shoulder when they lifted Laura away. As Victor was dragged to the patrol car, Emily buried herself into Jack's chest, trembling, her small hand tangled in Rex's fur. Jack bent low, shielding her from Victor's final glare, his storm-gray eyes unyielding. Rex stood tall, his chest rising and falling like a sentinel, his body pressed against Emily as though he knew she needed more than words. And in that moment, as the rain eased and the sirens wailed down the road, the storm at Silver River ended with the promise that Emily would never again face her monsters alone. The storm had broken hours earlier, leaving Maple Creek washed clean beneath a pale morning sky. The courthouse loomed in the center of town, its old stone walls gray with history, its steps crowded with reporters and townsfolk who whispered in anxious tones. Jack stood at the entrance, Emily at his side, leaning on her crutch, her small face pale but resolute. Rex sat tall beside them, his sable coat gleaming in the morning light, amber eyes steady as if he understood the gravity of the day. The trial of Victor Carter was not just a legal proceeding. It was the town's reckoning with shadows long ignored. Inside the courtroom, the air was tense, thick with the weight of truth waiting to be spoken aloud. Victor sat at the defense table, shackled, his once slicked-back hair now unkempt, his tailored suits replaced by the stark orange of prison garb. His dark eyes flickered with defiance, scanning the room as though searching for a foothold of power. But this time, there were none. Across from him, the prosecutor laid out the evidence: X-rays revealing fractured ribs and broken bones, photographs showing bruises and scars, testimonies from women who had survived years of silence. And then there was Emily, the smallest yet strongest witness. She stepped to the stand with trembling legs, her crutch echoing against the polished floor. The judge, an elderly man with silver hair and steady eyes, leaned forward kindly, softening the solemn air. Emily's voice shook at first, her hands clinging to the rail, but when she glanced at Jack and saw him nod, strength filled her words. She spoke of nights filled with fear, of the X-ray her mother had pressed into her small hands as a message of hope, and of the monster who had hurt not just their family but many others. Her words were plain, a child's truth stripped bare, yet they pierced the silence more powerfully than any polished speech. Victor tried to sneer, muttering denials, but the evidence was a fortress he could not breach. Laura, though too weak to stand in court, had given her statement from her hospital bed. Her frail voice had been recorded, recounting years of pain and the night she thought she would never see her daughter again. The other women, bruised but alive, testified one after another, their voices shaking yet firm, their stories weaving a tapestry of cruelty that no jury could ignore. Martha Jennings, in uniform, delivered the final blow. Detailed reports of raids that had uncovered other safe houses, other victims, each tied directly to Victor's network. The closing arguments painted no room for doubt. The prosecutor's voice rang with conviction as he held up the silver star-shaped USB that carried Victor's records of money, names, and trades, a damning symbol of greed and violence. The defense offered little but shallow excuses, attempts to smear the victims or question their memories. But the jury's eyes told the truth. They had seen enough. When the verdict was read, the room held its breath. "Guilty on all counts," the foreman declared. The sentence followed swiftly: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Victor's roar of outrage echoed in vain, silenced by the rattle of chains as deputies dragged him away. Emily clung to Jack's side, her tears a mixture of relief and grief. "It's over," she whispered. Jack bent close, his storm-gray eyes steady, his voice low. "It's over, Emily. He can't hurt you anymore." Rex pressed his head against her lap as if sealing the promise. The courtroom exhaled together. A collective weight lifted from Maple Creek's shoulders. Reporters scribbled notes, townsfolk murmured prayers of thanks, and Martha placed a firm hand on Jack's arm, her expression resolute. "We'll keep digging," she said quietly. "There are more out there, and now we know where to look." Jack nodded, knowing her fight was just beginning. In the days that followed, Laura remained in the hospital, her body fragile from the toll of years in chains. She held Emily's hand often, stroking her hair with a mother's love, but also with the knowledge of her own limitations. One evening, her voice soft but unwavering, she looked to Jack. "She trusts you. She calls you family. I can't give her the life she deserves right now, not until I heal. But you can. Will you?" Jack felt the weight of her request settle on his chest, heavier than any weapon he had carried. Yet when Emily looked at him with hopeful eyes, he found no hesitation. "Yes," he said simply. "I'll protect her, always." The guardianship was formalized soon after. In a smaller courtroom, with fewer eyes but no less gravity, the judge asked Emily directly, "Do you wish to stay with Mr. Carter?" Her small hand clutched Jack's, her voice steady. "Yes, he's my Uncle Jack. And Rex, too. They're my family." The gavel fell with finality, and though it was just a sound, it carried the force of a promise. Jack leaned down, whispering words that steadied her trembling. "Family isn't only blood, Emily. It's the ones who stand and fight for you, and we're not going anywhere." Life began to take on a new shape in Maple Creek. Jack's cabin became a home rather than a refuge, laughter replacing silence, warmth filling corners once dimmed by solitude. Emily learned to smile again, her crutch clicking across the wooden floor as Rex followed faithfully, always within reach. Martha continued her work, uncovering and rescuing more women bound by Victor's network, her name spoken with gratitude in hushed prayers. And through it all, Jack felt something he hadn't in years: renewal, a reason to rise each morning beyond his own survival. The final morning came crisp and bright, the mountains crowned with snow, the river glistening beneath the first true light of spring. Jack stood by the schoolyard, watching as Emily, dressed in her new red coat, adjusted her crutch and stepped forward. Children turned to greet her, curiosity softening into welcome as Rex trotted proudly at her side, drawing smiles and laughter. Emily glanced back once, her face lit with a shy but genuine smile. Jack raised a hand in quiet encouragement, pride swelling in his chest. As she disappeared into the crowd, he murmured to himself, "She's safe now. She's finally safe." And in that quiet moment, beneath the dawn over Maple Creek, a broken family had been reborn through sacrifice, courage, and the enduring bond of love. In the end, this story reminds us that true family is not only about blood, but about compassion, sacrifice, and the courage to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The quiet acts of kindness, the silent choices to stand in the way of darkness, and the willingness to give of ourselves for another. These are the sacrifices that rebuild broken lives and bring hope where it seemed impossible. Jack, Emily, and Rex show us that heroes are often ordinary souls who choose love over fear. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of the power of compassion. Leave a comment with your thoughts, subscribe to the channel so you never miss these stories of faith and courage, and may God bless you and your family.